So just welcome, and I'm going to start sharing my screen so that we can look at different things together. So let me see if this works. And let me put this in slideshow mode so it looks pretty. Okay. So there's this book that was published by PPC called God's Big Plan, o El Gran Plan de Dios. And so the book is about Pentecost and about the diversity that happened there. And so the book starts with this words: why aren't people all alike? ¿Por qué no todo el mundo es igual? God wanted us to be different. Dios quería que fuéramos diferentes. God made the world that way. Dios hizo el mundo así. And even saying God made the world that way, saying that that God wanted us to be different, is a theological statement that is very powerful, because it's not a fluke. It's not something that happened, because all of a sudden, evolution and all this other stuff that we talk about. It was God's plan from the beginning to make us all different. So the question that I wanted to pose to you is, why do you think God made the world that way? ¿Por qué ustedes creen que Dios hizo el mundo de esa manera? Have you ever thought about that? ¿Alguna vez ha pensado en eso? So share with me. And by the way, this is art from the book. Yeah. Elena, yes.
Yo pienso que si todos fuésemos iguales, yo creo que seríamos muy aburridos haciendo todas las cosas iguales. Pero Dios es bueno y hizo las cosas que fueran así.
Elena said that if God made us all the same, it would be boring. And that God delighted in doing things that are different. Certainly. Anything else that you want to say about this? This is mostly a presentation, so I'm not going to ask you a bunch of stuff because we need to move quicker. But but anything? Have you ever thought about God as having imagination, as having creativity, as not being, as we say, as not being colorblind, but creating each of the colors that we see every day? And it goes beyond the colors of our skin. As you can see in this picture, we're talking about different ways of seeing God, different shapes and sizes, different abilities, different, so whenever we think about the world and we think about it in a unity that connects to uniformity, to me, we're taking away some of the things that God is: God's imagination, God's creativity, God, God's way of presenting God's self to different people in different ways. And so it is, I think, that God made the world such a different place for different people, different colors of skin that are so amazing, that cover all the spectrum of colors that you can think of. It is an invitation for us as a church to look at ministry, to look at our life in community, and say, are we as imaginative, as creative, as looking at different possibilities like God is doing? And so it is a challenge for churches of different shapes and sizes, because we're not just talking about a white church. We also have, African American churches. We have Latino churches. We have all of it. We like our own spaces and our refuge, and so it, and that's a natural thing. I always say to people, English is my second language. I feel comfortable speaking to it, but when I go to the doctor and I want to explain what is hurting, I would prefer to do it in Spanish than do it in English, because it comes more natural. But at the same time, we get the challenge of this world, that's this magnificent world that God has made. And so, you know, we need to recognize and to embody and to embrace and to celebrate the diversity that is all around us, and try to figure out a way in which to celebrate that diversity in ministry. I like to use this concept, the understanding the diversity below the surface. Entendamos la diversidad bajo la superficie. And so that this is something that comes from the AFS intercultural program, and it's the iceberg concept of culture. So there are things that you, for example, see about me that are in the surface, that are in your awareness. And you may notice, okay, she has a little bit of an accent when speaking in English. She has curly hair. She's wearing a shirt that actually has English and Spanish on it. uh, and I told you I'm Puerto Rican, so that means whatever you think it means in your mind, because we all have sort of, we need to be careful with all our presuppositions and prejudice and implicit biases and all this other stuff. So what you see of a culture primarily is, okay, fine arts, literature, drama, classical music, popular music, folk dancing, games, cooking, dress. So if I talk to you about Mexican culture, your mind immediately goes to specific images. If you talk about, I have some folks from Wisconsin and in the church, and they use the phrase "a" all the time. So that's very Wisconsin and very Canada from what I'm, yeah, and it's a very interesting cadence when they're speaking. We have folks from from other places that are not as well known as Mexico, for example, and so it's hard to pinpoint. But the first thing we enjoy are the cooking, but there are other things beneath the surface that are primarily out of our awareness, and so we have of all of those here, and you're gonna get this material. So don't worry, don't fret, everything's fine. um we have notions of modesty. There are some cultures that just they all get together and they don't have any issues with taking starting to undress in front of everybody. And then you have some other cultures that go like, I need to go to the bathroom, excuse me. So you have courtship practices, and even in terms of theology, definition of sin and natures of friendship or relationship, body language. In an intercultural church, sometimes you find yourself doing crazy stuff. And I remember having a conversation, trying to communicate something across the room to a woman from our congregation who is from Michigan. And so I'm trying to say, let's get out of here. And I started doing, and cannot show you unless you're looking at me really, but what I did was, let's go. And I did this with my hands. I sort of moved my hands like this. And this is very Puerto Rican. And I assumed that she understood what I was saying. And she was looking at me like I was crazy. so there are a lot of things that are primarily out of our awareness that are there for our enjoyment and our discovery and to sort of enjoy in the setting of church and ministry, that we need to figure out. But in order to do that, we need to be aware that there's more than the tacos, and there's more than folk dancing, and there's more than a lot of, or the color of our skin, or the way our hair moves, or anything like that. So one of the issues right now with thinking about intercultural ministry is that people don't necessarily get what intercultural ministry is. La gente no entiende qué es eso, con qué se come. So it, Roger Nishioka, who is an educator, was talking about this in 2014. So this has been around for a long time. And so he's sort of saying, okay, so the challenge is that we've been thinking about doing multicultural ministry, and we need to move to do intercultural ministry. And so those little dots that you see, or little circles that you see there, are an explanation about the sort of the differences between three terms: multicultural, cross-cultural, and intercultural. And Roger takes this from the work of the United Church in Canada, who, Canada has been doing work with, relationship between the different ethnic groups for a long time, more so than the United States, I have to say. So, so what is the difference between those three terms that we throw around and think are the same? So as you notice, there's a bunch of circles that are different colors, and they're there. I could even say that we are having a multicultural workshop right now, because I know that we are all from different places, and have different textures of hair and all of that. So we are there, but that doesn't necessarily imply that we have a further relationship or understanding of who we are and what we bring. So we live alongside one another, and we value tolerance, and we celebrate, we have get-togethers or potlucks, and we all bring different food, and we know that we like different music, and maybe even dress a little bit different. But this just only requires superficial and polite social interaction. We just know each other. We know that they're different, and that's it. Cross-cultural is a little bit different, because there are some reaching across boundaries. So there's a little bit more interaction. We try to build bridges of relationship between cultural communities, but we usually go back to our own communities, and we share, we listen, we learn, and we are open to begin changing. So this is sort of the second step, or the in-between step of all of this. And it usually requires that we are intentional, that we go below the surface, like we were saying before. And then intercultural, and you see all the little lines of communication there. There is a comprehensive mutuality. There is reciprocity. There's a recognition that we are all equal, but that we bring the richness that we enjoy is because of the difference that we bring. Our social structures and interactions are defined by justice, by mutuality, by respect, by power sharing, by equality, by acceptance, by freedom, diversity. It doesn't mean that we um, don't ask questions, or that we're like we learned everything that there is. We are learning with each other, and we are understanding each other. And so this is a deeper model of community than multicultural ministry or cross-cultural ministry. And let me tell you, this intercultural ministry even happens, for example, in Latino churches. Because we have Elena comes from Orlando, and maybe she goes to a church where there's Puerto Ricans, but there's also people from Colombia, people from the Dominican Republic, people from from Venezuela, from Cubans from different places. And
Yes.
even
Yes.
though we all speak Spanish, that doesn't mean that we understand each other. I mean, and it's not even because we speak a different kind of Spanish, it's because we come from different cultures with even a different, forms of government. Puerto Rico is a U.S. Territory. Cuba is, for
Communist.
a communist country. The Dominican Republic is another place. The people from the Caribbean are not necessarily the same as people from Mexico or from South America. And so we all come from all this. People assume that we all understand each other because we all speak Spanish, but there can be some mixtures and some, infighting and in some of the situations.
Yeah.
And we need to, the problem is that we are not aware of that. And we don't realize that maybe that's part of the struggle, even though we all speak the same language. So any questions as of now? I wish I could see you all. Let me see if I can figure that out, because I'm not sure if somebody. Megan, hi, I haven't seen you. I like that second name there, Saavedra. Reminds me of El Quijote. Uh, okay. So this is a little bit of this comes from the United Church of Canada, which has an amazing page, and I shared that link in our presentation, and you were going to get it. It is an amazing thing that they're doing, and so these are the sort of benchmarks, if you want to say it, or challenges or goals of being an intercultural church. Well, an intercultural church is a welcoming church. It's joyful and accepting and life-giving, and it trusts that God's Spirit opens us to new experiences, and that's really important. You have to open the heart and open everything in your life to recognize that what you know is not the only thing. It recognizes that those experiences can be challenging and painful or uncomfortable. In our church, we have people from South Sudan that have come from civil war, from a, basically dividing up the division between Sudan and South Sudan, and horrible, horrible war stories. Their understanding, for example, of evil is totally different from my privileged life. And I cannot just go there and like, oh, and go philosophizing, about the devil or evil from the pulpit, because I have to recognize that their vision of the way that you understand people coming to your village and killing most everybody has to be that the devil is real, because you cannot fathom in your life that people could do such things. So that's one example of that. In referring to God, it uses a range of names and images. I don't necessarily like using Lord for God all the time, but there's people in my congregation that use Lord. And I cannot say, no, we don't use Lord because, or Jehovah. That's the other one that, it's like Jehovah. No, we don't use Jehovah. That's a misinterpretation of blah, blah, blah. People use Jehovah, and it usually means something dear to people. In writing policies and making statements, it uses many different images and ways of speaking. It is committed to listening and learning, and not just speaking and teaching. Listening and learning are really important in the ministry and prophetic side of things. These last Sundays, I've been preaching on the lectionary, and it's all about this balances in discipleship, that you're not just there to talk, you're supposed to be listening as well, or not just there to teach, you're supposed to practice. And so it invites full participation and dialogue. It allows itself to be changed. And so this is an example. And this is, yes, it is a trick question. What is the difference between, we usually like to use graphics in our things. Nos gusta usar gráficas en la iglesia. And so what is the difference between these two graphics? Which one do you think communicates hospitality and which one maybe doesn't? Come on, take that mute button away. Don't worry, there's no, I'm not gonna like, go on in plenary and tell everybody what's going on. Yes, Megan, I saw the mute button out.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my first instinct would be the left one would be that there's some equity between all the different signs and all the languages, whereas, these, I can't remember what these graphics are called on the right, but like they may value the Wordle, they may value the majority rather than the minority. So more people may be saying welcome, so you see it bigger, but yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my first instinct, but the others, there's some more equity in the
good instinct
in the different values.
Very good instinct. And this is something that we don't usually notice. And we see that Wordle and, oh, it looks so pretty. And, but what's the biggest word in the Wordle, in the word cloud? It's a word in English. And so I hadn't even noticed this. And all of a sudden I go like, oh, I mean, the English is the biggest word that there is, but in this other one, everybody seems to be in the same, there's no dominance of one of the languages over the other. Everybody looks different. We have different maybe ages, different shapes of hair and all of that. And the other one is pretty, but if somebody is astute enough to notice that the word welcome is the one that is huge, then you go like, so we need, you're gonna hear a lot that I care about big things, and we need to care also about little things, because we don't know what, everything communicates something. Todas las cosas comunican diferentes cosas. Okay. The second thing, an intercultural church is a relational church. And so it treasures the different contexts that God gives to different communities. It values diverse expressions of faith. So it's not just, and we were listening to Bruce Chao talking about the worship wars and all of that. But if you're in an intercultural church, we don't look funny to the people that are doing something that is not the same thing that we're doing. So if everybody starts clapping, and somebody doesn't clap, they're not look at, oh Lord, look at that person doesn't clap, or my goodness. Again, with our South Sudanese folks, when they are like in the worship zone, they start doing this primal scream all of a sudden, and you go like, what the heck is that? Because you're not used to it. But it's one of those that you listen to in movies, and so. But as a pastor, I was like, whenever I heard them doing that, I said, yes, the worship is working. Because they're in the worship zone. They really are feeling God in this moment, and that's really awesome. At the same time, that's with with our folks that are Latino and Latina, raising their hands or enjoying, and incorporating a music that it was originally written in Spanish, and not necessarily using everything written in English, that sometimes it was originally written in German. Like goodness, I forgot. Oh my Lord, I forgot Martin Luther's hymn. Oh, never mind.
Yo
But
fuerte.
eso mismo es, pero en inglés, ¿cómo es que se dice? Fortress. Holy moly.
A mighty fortress is our God, that one?
Thank you. I remembered it. Remembered it in Spanish. Because, so, I mean, we sing that song like it was originally written in English, and it's not. A lot of our like dear hymns were not written in English, were written in German or in other. So it offers a positive vision of the whole community together in its diversity. It encourages a healthy critique of each other's points of view. I just love, and this is a conversation between Latinos and Latinas, when we say something that we say in one language, in one shade of Spanish, and people go like, no, you shouldn't say that because that's a bad word in my country. It's like, so. I mean, we need to tolerate, you know, what we bring to the table. We need to understand each other, not start like, oh, no, you shouldn't be saying that when it doesn't have the same meaning and expression in the other country. It values and give and take the give and take of respectful relationship. It commits to the building of right relationships with all the creation, and it takes steps to become a multilingual community. And that's really important. Part of going from being a multicultural church to being an intercultural church is trying to live into the notion that our first language is our heart language, and that if you want to be an intercultural church, you have to recognize that people whose first language is not English, their emotional connection to worship and to what is going on in the church is not going to be the same if the only language you use for worship is English. And that all the languages that you integrate should be as important and as present. For example, I have no issues with us doing interpretation in this type of setting, specifically now when we're doing Zoom. But sometimes I feel like, for example, if you don't touch that little global thing while we were listening to Bruce today, you wouldn't realize that there's translation going on. So the other two languages that are not being spoken out loud in front of everybody are hidden. And so they're important, but they're hidden. And how do you, you know, give importance to both languages or to all the languages presence if you don't use music from that culture? If you only use English hymns that have been translated to Spanish and not Spanish hymns that have been translated to English, if you don't give a chance for people to speak their own language, I'm not doing that right now. I'm assuming everybody understands my English. But I started to tell Elena, for example, if you feel more comfortable speaking to me in Spanish, please do so, because that's your language of the heart. And so if I can understand the language of heart of a person, I will make myself available to have a conversation and to engage with that person. And so it is really important not to say we're going to start a multicultural ministry whose only language is the common language for everybody, which is English. We need to make sure that we provide resources and spaces, and not, if you do that, not to force communication, and to allow for people to feel safe and comfortable. And an example for that, we do potluck every first, or we used to do potluck every first Sunday of the month. And you know, our session was looking and saying, oh, everybody that speaks English sits in one table, and everybody from South Sudan sits in another, and everybody from Puerto Rico sits together, and everybody from Mexico sits together. And you start trying to figure out, oh, let's get them together, and let's But at the same time, you have to allow, the Spanish speakers have have been dealing with English all the 6 days a week, and they get a chance to touch base with their common culture during potluck. So what am I doing if I, in the name of trying to have everybody to relate to each other, then I just destroy the only possibility of them finding the commonality of sitting at a table. There will be like 1,000 other chances of you to relate: worship, mission, uh, special activities. But why not leave them alone in the park so that they can have conversations with each other? This is I love this cross, but it just this went away really quick. To the other side of things, let's find places and ways in which language is not important. We have a lot of symbolism in the church. One of the things that we do is communion. My dream would be to do a communion that is completely without words, if I don't get into trouble by not saying the words of institution. But when there's such a particular symbolism in raising the cup, in taking the bread. And if you come from a Christian tradition, you're gonna know what I'm doing, even if I say those words or not. So sometimes what we do, I say one part of the words of institution in English and I don't translate, because the Spanish speakers know what I'm doing while I'm moving. And the same goes for the English speakers. The second part I do in Spanish, I don't translate, so that the people can focus on what I'm doing and not what I'm saying. And there's a lot of things in the church that have meaning beyond words, from music, from baptism, from the symbols that we use. There's so much things that could transmit a lot. And so we need to value silence and how that connects us to one another. Okay, so an intercultural church is an adaptive church. It is available with God's grace to accept mistakes. It learns from the past and grows. It is open to being vulnerable. So these, and this is really hard, because some of us come from traditions where pastors are not vulnerable, and church is not necessarily a place to be vulnerable. It's a place to sort of get our strength on to be able to deal with the world outside. So vulnerability, pastoral vulnerability, leadership vulnerability, are sometimes looked at as as something that we need to adapt to. It affirms diverse cultural identities and avoids their assimilation into the dominant culture. And this is really important as well, because what we expect is to have a church where everybody will get accustomed to session meetings, to parliamentary procedure, to the same sense of time and space. And we need to recognize that that's not the case with everybody. Some cultures like to speak more. Some cultures are more, extroverted. Some people don't like silence, and that's human. We're not the same. It doesn't matter what culture we come from. There's people here that are extroverts. There's people that are introverts, and there's people that are always late for stuff, or people that are always early for stuff. It dares to engage in an ongoing transformation of heart, mind, structure, and policy. And that policy and systems is really important, because it's the whole systemic thing is what gets us into trouble. We expect everybody, what is this, square peg, round hole for everybody, and that's not everybody, especially in an intercultural church. It adapts to change when change is called for. And this is an example that I love. There are some cultures that are linear in their sense of time, and there's others that are cyclical in their terms of time. There are cultures that focus on numbers, on looking at the clock, and there are cultures that are carpe diem, seize the day. So my classic example for this is the first time that I went to a baby shower here in the United States. It's that we are having the baby shower, and it's from 3 to 5. As a Puerto Rican, I get that it started at 3. But usually in Puerto Rico, we just say it starts at 3. We don't ever say it ends at 5. And so when we got there, I got there on time. I'm an on-time person. The whole island time doesn't work. But everybody was leaving at 4:45, and 5 was like, really? Why are people leaving? Really? 5? Like hard time 5? Because my sense is more cyclical. It's like I live in a moment, and I live in the moment, and I live in I measure measures of love, like the famous song. So I was all like, 5, really? So that's one thing. An intercultural church is a justice-seeking church. If you have people from different cultures that are being affected by the dominant culture in a different way, there is no way that you can ignore what happens outside of the walls of the church. And I'll give you one example of that. When someone in government speaks badly about Africa, about Haiti, about Mexico, and you have people from a country in Africa, from Haiti, and from Mexico in your congregation, it is going to affect the way that you preach the gospel and you deal with the issues that are happening outside. If you have people that are undocumented or refugees in your congregation, what is happening outside of the church will impact what is going on inside the church. So there are churches, and specifically intercultural churches, that cannot afford to ignore racism, that cannot afford to ignore white privilege, that cannot afford to think globally, to think nationally. And so it has to be a church that seeks justice, because in your relationships, you will find out that you're being challenged to deal with those issues. This is one of those famous graphics that we use all the time to explain. And I love this one because it's a little bit more like reality. Yeah, there are some people that have more boxes to stand on and some that are in like little holes. And if you notice equality, that doesn't help out the little guy. Equity, but there is an added one where the wall is taken over and there's liberation. I like, as I said before, I work as with PPC, and we're about to woof. And so we have a notion, an explanation in Growing in Grace and Gratitude, which is our children's curriculum, that says equality is not everyone getting the same, but everyone getting what they need. Equality is not everybody getting the same, is everyone getting what they need. And so there is need to prioritize, to empower. Liberation theology speaks about God's preference. And if you don't like that word preference, I would give you that God has priorities, and like we do. And sometimes There are some priorities that we will agree with, and sometimes there's priorities that we don't understand. But definitely, there is a need to seek out justice. Okay. And an intercultural church is a church that looks at it's an intentional church. I'm trying to look at you all and look at the title, and I cannot read. It aims to be enriched by different experiences and points of view. It supports and encourages diverse leadership. So not everybody that leads the worship service can look the same or sound the same. It examines itself. That's a constant. It reflects and keeps learning. And you cannot, we constantly say in session meetings, because we are an intercultural church, it doesn't mean that we're woke, that we know more than everybody, that we're not racist, that we don't have any prejudices, because we're human. And every one of us, in any, whether it's a big presence or a small one, we all have biases that we need to fight against. We all have, our prejudices. We all have, racism that we have to swim through in different shapes and forms. Some of us have power and privilege, and we all, in some shape or form, human beings have the horrible tendency of, whenever they're in power situations, they pick on the little guy. Doesn't matter if they're little guys according to somebody else. So the different points of view, I love this, the famous this famous caricature of looking at the elephant. It's a fan, it's a spear, it's a snake, depending on what they're touching on the elephant. But yes, we know we all don't have the same point of view, and we can all learn from each other's point of view. And this is the last one. An intercultural church is a missional church. It looks for and applies the biblical and theological foundations for becoming. So this is not just a social issue or lives in the world. We need to understand why we're doing this. But going back to the beginning of the presentation, why did God make us different? And so that is important to understand. And what are the biblical and theological basis for us behaving this way? And it affirms that God has a mission for the church, but it has a mission for the world. And that we are all part of God's kingdom. And I say that without the G, because I'm talking about God's family. We are all parts of God's family. And in all families, we have dysfunctionality, we have fighting, but there's also the possibility of love and acceptance. I'm just showing, part of the biblical basis for trying to be intercultural is Pentecost. And so I'm hoping that you got it. We have here paintings that come from the Chinese culture, Jesus Mafa, or Jesus Mafa, that puts everything, every part of Jesus's life in an African context. We have a painter from liberation theology called Cerezo Barredo. And we have another painter that comes from liberation theology that's called Fano, which is the little more looks like children's. So in all these interpretations, we see the diversity of God's kingdom and the diversity that God intended to emphasize in Pentecost, the importance of reaching out to others that do not speak the same language, that do not come from the same place. And look at the diversity, and there's much more diversity in their interpretation of this passage, and the importance and the emphases that are in each passage, and how some of them have to deal with winds, and some of them happen in Pentecost surrounding a meal, which is kind of amazing. So the last thing that Roger says is that at the core of intercultural ministry is empathy. The ability and desire to move past the surface of relationship and stand in the shoes of others, to see what they see, to feel what they feel, and then as one in Christ, walk through these experiences together. So the last 10, almost 10 minutes that I have, or a little bit less than that, or 5 minutes actually, I want to spend, talking a little bit more about the church that I have the privilege, and I'm grateful to God that I pastor. So this is Beachmont's journey. Let's go back. So this was not an intercultural church from the beginning. This was a white church in the 1930s. As you can see by the little kitties and the black and white picture, there was no diversity in that church. And so in the last, I would say 20 years, the church has been then moving from being an all white church to a church that has people from Latin America, Africa, Asia, and the United States. I always say Pittsburgh there, but this happened because the church started supporting the work of Kentucky Refugee Ministries, for example, and also noticed that there was a Cuban community here in Louisville that was growing. And so the church started working with Cuban families, with families that came from Asia as refugees. And so they started to incorporate into the church in such a way that at one point, the church decided to hire a Spanish-speaking pastor to then try to nest a Spanish-speaking church. Through changes, the English-speaking pastor first left, and so the Spanish-speaking pastor had to deal with the two churches, and they started doing bilingual worship services. It's not easy. Some folks left, English speakers left, Spanish speakers left, and then the Spanish-speaking pastor left. And the church found that it didn't have the money to hire a full-time pastor. So the pastor that they have now works 13 hours per week. We do bilingual worship services every Sunday, now through Zoom, like we're having right now. And so, but it is more, and it's about 60, 70 people in church. The main issue that that allows a pastor with a church with a pastor that works 13 hours per week is that it has very strong leadership. And working in Louisville is a good thing because you have all these pastors that come to work in the national offices and they sort of appear in church, which is a cool thing. And when they retire, they stick around here and they want to work more in the church, which is also very nice. But so we are a Matthew 25 church because we, as I said, we have people from different places. We have African Americans in the church. We have people that have no documents in the church. We have people that came as refugees in the church. And so it makes all the sense in the world to be a Matthew 25 church. And if you didn't know that those materials are in Spanish, yes, they are. I didn't make that graphic. That graphic was made by the national office, which is good. And so, Evie, let me explain. Matthew 25 is a Presbyterian initiative that has those three foci there: dismantling structural racism, eradicating systemic poverty, and see, I've spoken too much English already. Revitalization of churches. Sorry, I remember Evie Moravian. I need to explain PCUSA Chinese lingo too. And the other two things that have become part of our ethos as a church is the notion of kingdom. And once again, it's without the G. This was a concept by theologian called Ada Maria Isasi, that looked at the at community as God, not necessarily in this language of kingdoms and realms and kings and power and all the that implies, but no, God is trying to create a family. Comes from we're kin, and in Spanish it actually translates to familia, so family. And then we started talking about Ohana, which is the and I'm putting if you haven't seen a movie called Lilo and Stitch, yes, it does come from that. But it's the notion of nobody gets left behind or forgotten. That is the what I think the central part of our notion. Everybody's important. Nobody gets left behind. Nadie se queda afuera. Nadie se queda atrás. Nadie es olvidado. Nobody is forgotten. And so those are aspirationals. Eso son cosas que deseamos hacer, but we work to make them happen. Pero tratamos de hacer que funcione. Again, not easy. And this is, I hope you all had lunch. This is an observation that Sandra van Opstal, who writes a book called The Next Worship, Glorifying God in the Diverse World, comments, because it is an awkward experience. Some people have lack of exposure, so they don't know. And the reason, for example, the green stuff that you see there with the rolled up bread, that is a South Sudanese dish. Called molokia with injera. Injera is the bread. It doesn't taste like anything, but if you submerge it in it tastes amazing, and it's made with peanuts and with herbs. But I hadn't, as a Puerto Rican, I had never in my life tasted that. So lack of exposure, so it makes it awkward. Preference. You see those black sausages over to that side? Elena knows what those are, because those are morcillas.
Yes.
In Puerto Rico, we eat a lot of morcillas. But when I explain what morcillas are in English, people will go like, ew, I don't want to eat blood sausage.
Blood sausage, yes.
Yeah, blood sausage. That sounds awful. I would prefer not to eat blood sausage. And then the fear, if you come from a Mexican culture, you know what that is. That soup is pozole. And pozole, it is for Puerto Ricans, it's fearful because it has a lot of pique. It has heat, and so Puerto Ricans don't eat heat. They don't. They do not do picante. So the first time you try pozole, you know what it is, but you go like, oh my lord, this is gonna be it's an explosion in my stomach. So you have all of this stuff with all of these different cultures. Everything is awkward. And the greatest challenge for our church and our generations is that people make choices based on what they prefer. Ew, this is awkward. I'm not going to stay here. Ew, this is not what I prefer. I'm not going to stay here. Oh, that is kind of, I'm fearful of that. I'm not going to stay here. So it can be a turnoff. And we've had people that have been there one Sunday, have heard the Sunday worship in Espanol and English, and go like, this is not for me. And it's not the English speakers only. It's also the Spanish speakers. And those of us that know the two languages, like hearing the echo, and it gets, it takes getting used to. But once you get used to, what I love about it is that we have people that really want to be there and be part of that experience. And so you have people that are committed to the church. It may be a small church, but if you have committed people, that's vital congregation right there. And it's, oh my Lord. Okay. So this is part of our folks, and I wanted to share with you some stuff, but it's 2:18. I know that I'm not at that, that I'm, but I don't know. I prefer to stop here. And then if you have any questions or anything, because it's supposed to go to 2:15 apparently, but we do have time for questions because the next thing is 2:45. So any questions that you have?
I have a question.
Yes.
How do we minister to a section of community who drink milk and are not ready for meat at the
Mm,
same time, like worship or Bible study, or just being inclusive in the whole church?
yeah. The way that I saw, and I got there after they started thinking about these things, is to first to talk with it, to your leadership about, we have all this population that is around the church, and maybe we should do something. There's a lot of conversations about uh, milk drinking in the denomination right now because uh, of all the issues with racism. Everybody wants to know how to start thinking about such things in the church.
Mhm.
There's people that start with book clubs, and there's people that just have one book. Um, that book by Sandra Van Opstal that I told you about is a good book. There's another one that I had at the end there, and if you get this, you will get that information. That is all about multicultural ministry. The some of the denominations have already started thinking about these issues and have some ideas. I know more about the PCUSA because that's what I am.
Mhm.
So there is an intercultural ministries part of the pcusa.org website that speak about this. The United Church of Christ. You can go to their website and look for different, So this is not a one size fits all. It's having conversations and creating, and not doing it in like official settings. Just having conversations somewhere that people will not raise all the walls, and where they can feel that they can have questions and ask questions, that no question is stupid.
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, and to start working, creating relationships with the community. That's the other thing that the church did. As I mentioned, the way that the church started transforming was having connections with the Kentucky Refugee Ministries organization, and sponsoring refugee families and having connections. So maybe something that is a tutoring program for children whose parents are first generation from. Right now we have a learning hub. You don't know how many families have issues with NTI, and if the parents, we have one of the families is a family from Honduras that came here seeking asylum, and they were just here when the pandemic started. So the kids have been 7 months without being able to connect to school, and they don't know English.
Wow.
So you know asking questions around and trying to surround this in the context of mission and outreach creates relationship, and from relationship it's less scary. It's,
Mhm.
yeah. Don Jose, where are you right now in ministry? I'm just curious.
In regards to the church, or is
Yeah.
that what you're asking?
Hmm.
We're part of the Matthew 25 initiative, and we've been doing that for about 2 years now. Of course, the pandemic hit a big blow in our initiative, and now we're looking to see how we can be an impact in the community here in New Braunfels.
Okay, thank you. I was, as just been told, we've been passing our allotted time, so so the session will start in 1 minute. If you have any questions, I'm in the bookstore. you can, we can have conversations. So thank you for being here. And hopefully you will get the information that I didn't go through, but thank you.